Battle is far from over for one of the accused in the asbestos matter. Magashule's former PA, Moroadi Cholota. This as the Constitutional Court has ruled that her extradition from the United States of America to South Africa was unlawful. However, the ruling does not deprive the High Court of jurisdiction to prosecute in the criminal matter. The Constitutional Court has affirmed the legal position that it is the executive, the Minister of Justice, that holds the power to extradite fugitives from foreign states, not a functionary power such as the National Prosecuting Authority. To talk about this and what it means, we're joined by legal journalist Karyn Maughan. Karyn, what are the details of the test that was applied by the Constitutional Court in whether or not the extradition of Moroadi Cholota was valid?
Well, essentially what the Constitutional Court did was that it referred to a very well-known case that came before the Constitutional Court in the sort of early 90s, where it said that was, of course, the case of Ibrahim, who was an MK operative who had been unlawfully kidnapped by the apartheid government and then brought back to South Africa to face trial. And in that particular instance, the ability of the state to put him on trial had been totally invalidated by the courts, because they said we simply cannot essentially condone a kind of unlawful kidnapping exercise by the state. And what the Constitutional Court has said in regards to Moroadi Cholota case, of course, the extradition matters that involve a number of other accused, because we know, according to Pauke's affidavit at the Apex Court, that this matter affects like 89 other cases, including the brothers who are accused of AKA's murder. They said that just be that the court decides that it doesn't have jurisdiction to hear a case based on the fact that the extradition is unlawful. You have to show serious breach of conduct by the state in order to justify that kind of a decision. And what has happened now...
Karyn, I'm just going to pause you there. Because your line is not particularly stable. It's cutting in and out intermittently. I want you to repeat some part of that, just to get clarity here. What the court is saying that is, am I understanding the judgment correct, that the court is saying even though the extradition was unlawful, the High Court and the NPA can still go ahead in prosecuting the matter and calling you as an accused?
Well, essentially what they've said is that Cholota now has the ability to pursue a special plea in which she may, again, as she had done before, Oliver, argue that the state's conduct in seeking her extradition was unlawful, that it was deceptive, and that there were manifest of law that meant that she should not, her extradition process was not itself lawful. And so she will have to show on a very material level, use that special, that it would be against the interests of justice for her to be tried. So the bar is going to be very high for her in respect of that.
Cholota's already been charged. Given that her extradition was unlawful, is she at liberty to leave the country again?
Well, I'm not exactly sure of the conditions under which she was granted bail. In normal instances, accused people are expected to hand in their passports. My understanding case with her, so I don't have the ability currently to leave the country, but certainly, you know, if she did so, it would be very, very problematic for her, because then you could foresee a situation in which the state would again seek an extradition for her, and then her grounds that this was an unlawful extradition process that invalidated her rights and she should therefore be acquitted would be undermined. So I think it would be very much against her interests to leave the country in that way in order to try and evade trial. And certainly from the perspective of her lawyers, they are arguing that she has a case to make that the NPA has mistreated her, that it has been dishonest, that it has conducted certain abuses against her, and that she intends to pursue that case in another special plea, which will be heard and decided in the next few weeks.
Yeah, the Constitutional Court judgment made clear the powers and responsibilities of the Minister of Justice in these sort of exercises. What is that clarity?
Well, essentially what the Constitutional Court has said is that while the NPA has the ability to prepare an extradition application, extradition isn't just a legal issue. It is also a diplomatic issue that is controlled by the politics of the executive, by certain political decisions that may influence whether or not they pursue an extradition or not. And that is why it is so important that it is the Minister of Justice, a member of the executive, that pursues that process. And essentially what they've said is that the NPA does play a functional role, but it's not legally appropriate. And they looked at, instances around the world, because South Africa is by no means the only country in the world where the Justice Department or an member of the executive is responsible for seeking the extradition of accused. They've said this is something that is globally prevalent, and therefore, the NPA's argument that it should be solely responsible for that extradition process is simply not legally sound.
Yeah. And quite importantly, this does then become precedent-setting, as you mentioned earlier, for a number of other matters. Once again, just contextualize for us why Cholota is such a key figure in the asbestos trial.
Essentially, she is the linchpin in the state's case against Ace Magashule, because she was the person on the evidence that we've seen in the application for her extradition who sent various emails to the late murdered businessman Ego Pambeni, who of course was in business with Edwin Sodi, in relation to the so-called asbestos scam, that 255 million rand alleged fraud that the NPA is saying was committed by, amongst others, these two business people, Sodi and Mpambeni, and of course Magashule as a key player in it, as well as other government officials that allegedly received kickbacks in exchange for their role in the scheme. And the person that was sending emails on behalf of Magashule was Moroadi Cholota. She testified at the state capture inquiry, and for a very long time, the NPA said they believed that she would be potentially a crucial witness, a potential 204 witness as well, against Ace Magashule. They said that when they went to interview her in the United States, it became apparent that she was not going to cooperate with her in these investigations. And it was then, Oliver, that this process, which was ultimately successful and resulted in her being extradited from the United States, was achieved. But of course, as we now know, as is the case with at least 89 other extraditions, that extradition was pursued by the NPA and not the Minister of Justice. And based on a very important 2024 Supreme Court of Appeal decision in another matter, she was able to successfully challenge the validity of her extradition on that basis and was essentially released by the court. The Constitutional Court has now overturned that decision and opened doors for her to again pursue a special plea, but she remains an accused now in that case.
Yeah. Local quiz champion and legal journalist Karyn Maughan, thank you so much for your time on this. Really do appreciate it.